Hello, everyone. Welcome to Refugee Welcome Collective Lunch and Learn series. In these sessions, we aim to bring you interesting and timely information, whether you are a volunteer, community sponsor, resettlement agency staff, a local advocate, or just someone who's interested in learning more. We hope that you enjoy today's session, Community Sponsorship to Community Advocacy. Just a little bit about Refugee Welcome Collective. Refugee Welcome Collective collaborates with partners to provide in-depth training programs, weekly training sessions, resources, and on-demand technical assistance for sponsors, resettlement agency staff, refugees paired with sponsors, community and institutional partners, and others to support quality community sponsorship programs across the United States. Just for housekeeping, just as a reminder for everyone joining us today, there is a control panel in your upper right-hand corner that will allow you to submit questions through the questions box. I would encourage you to submit these questions during the webinar so we can answer them in our Q&A time toward the end of our webinar. Everyone on today's webinar is automatically muted. However, if you have any questions or if you have technical issues, please raise your hand through the control panel or submit a question in the questions box so we can assist you. Additionally, the presentation and any resources and a recording will be sent to everyone following today's webinar. This brings us to our presenter for today, Abby Simpson. She is the community engagement organizer with Church World Service. Abby, thank you so much for joining us today, and I will let you take it from here.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. Like Joy said, my name is Abby. I work at Church World Service headquarters. I'm one of our community engagement organizers, meaning I work to connect with some of our local offices and a lot of our community members to partner with refugee resettlement beyond the scope of what our staff do. So involving churches and individuals, businesses, anyone who is outside of our payroll, basically, that is able to assist with the comprehensive use of welcoming here in the US. So it's great to be here with you all, and we're going to go ahead and get started. So talking today about community sponsorship and how that can lead to community advocacy. So first, I want to throw some definitions at you. And first is, what is community sponsorship? And it is a very large, far-reaching definition. Community sponsorship is an umbrella term. It can describe different types of models of how resettlement works. Certain refugees are paired with community groups or with local offices that can commit, sometimes legally, but then also just within certain parameters, to provide clearly defined in-kind or financial contributions to complete some core services. Community sponsors can look like many different things. There's resettlement agency-led, so that's partnership through a local office, and that is where you walk closely with some of our staff on the ground through a co-sponsorship program, and you have a person checking in with you, you're regularly connected within a certain geographical area. We also have community-led sponsorship. These do not have to be associated with a local office, so they're not bound by geography or certain limitations in that space. This has been an area that's been in the news more frequently. If you've heard about Welcome Corps, they've also just introduced through the Sponsor Circle program pathways for Cubans, Haitians, Nicaraguans, and Venezuelans. And then we also just started a Welcome Corps on Campus program working with college campuses. Welcome Corps, if you're not familiar, it is a brand new program. It's been introduced under the current presidential administration. It has a goal to welcome an additional 10,000 refugees outside of local office support. So this is a way for the US to booster its refugee impact here in the US. And so if that is something that you are interested in, or you're interested in any of these and you're not already involved, you can let me know and I can definitely connect you with the right people. And then the next slide. So this just goes through some of the definitions of what I just talked through. One thing that I do want to highlight is remote placement. So if you or anyone you know has a desire to welcome, but you live outside 100 miles of a local resettlement office, we have a program to help you, because we have people who have maybe friends or family who they want to be reunited with, and they don't live geographically close to one of our offices. We also have fantastic groups in the community who want to welcome and be a welcoming member, but do not live close to an office. So we work with you through our remote placement program, and it's a way to just increase our scope without that geographic confine of needing to be close to a local office. And you can go ahead to the next slide. So there are many different types of community sponsorship, and even a less challenging or less time-consuming way of community sponsorship is through things like volunteering and donating, and being an advocate for a local office. And we'll get to some of those things in a moment. But just some benefits of community sponsorship. It supports three main factors. The first is that it does support our newcomers. So refugees, asylees, SIVs, people who are coming from overseas who are displaced, who have proven a fear of persecution and have been given the chance to start a new life here in the US. We commonly refer to those as newcomers, in our umbrella term. For them, it increases access to social capital and supports integration. In a smaller scale, smaller example, it's the equivalent if you go on a trip and you don't know anyone or anything, and you have to figure out everything on your own, maybe in a place where you don't speak the language, don't understand how the currency works, how the public transport system works, and how much easier that is if you have someone there who is helping you, who is walking alongside of you, who is guiding you, taking your hand. And so we just see our newcomers who have that community sponsorship and community support just have such a easier acclimation to their new life. And so it just allows them to be integrated in their community in a much quicker way, and also just in a way that promotes friendship. Something that, while we all love our jobs on staff with CWS, legally there's only so much we can do in a friendship capacity. It's too much of a power dynamic, but the community is in a much different space with that. And so many people who are new to the US actively seek that companionship and community that we cannot provide, but the community can. There's also a huge benefit to community sponsorship for the people who are sponsoring, for you, for your friends, for anyone who is taking on this initiative. It brings individuals together in shared acts of service. It also opens your eyes to different systems, making new connections, and providing just a new space to serve and pour into and give. And we see so many beautiful friendships and relationships blossom through partnership. Also, community sponsorship helps our local communities. It provides a more welcoming attitude towards newcomers. It is a more robust and fully comprehensive ability for someone to become involved. Sponsors also helping newcomers get settled into their community also means that they most likely are going to stay in this community, providing economically, paying taxes, doing all the things that communities need in order to grow and to thrive. You can go to the next slide. So sometimes our community sponsors have certain requirements. There are certain checklists of things that they have to do, and a lot of those are listed here. But separate even from that checklist, these are what we see as our largest needs for community support. The first one, far and away at this moment, is housing. I don't think it's a secret to anyone that housing has dramatically changed. It's become more scarce in the US in the last few years. It's become dramatically more expensive, and the budgets that we have to support newcomers has stayed relatively the same. So it means that we have to become more and more creative with housing solutions. And for someone who is local to the community, maybe has connections to housing, maybe they know of someone who has a house that they're willing to rent at a low cost, or they have a connection to an apartment complex, or maybe they're just willing to co-sign on a lease and lower that cost and that risk structure, when the community steps in and helps resettlement agencies with housing, we see housing solutions grow at a much quicker rate than just us being able to advocate. We also see a lot of help with employment opportunities. You and your friends probably have connections to businesses, jobs, people who are looking to hire. And if you don't, you have lived in the community, you drive down the street where a help wanted sign is, and you are maybe able to drive someone to an interview or help them build out a resume, help explain what employment in America entails, such as being on time, certain hygiene, things like that. So huge needs there. It's also very known in the US that our public transportation systems in the majority of our locations around the US is lacking, maybe especially compared to some of the locations that people are coming from. So helping with transportation, navigating those spaces. I've also, when I've worked at the local level, seen community partners step in and help with bus orientation and providing rides to and from places. But I've also seen people help newcomers purchase their first vehicle, helping them learn how to budget and save, and then taking them to a used car dealership, helping them advocate for themselves and haggle, or at least know what to look for, and know that they're getting a fair deal. So a really great way and space to step in there. We also have needs with medical services. Healthcare is just complicated for all of us. And so just having someone who first language is English, or at least has been in the US and understands our medical system, being able to help navigate that, helping open a bank account, navigating through our grocery stores, understanding the difference between organic and generic and a store brand can really help save people money. And it's not something that is always taught, but you as a community member can be a part of that. Helping people just orient to the community, learning the layout of a city or a town, learning how to get places, big things that are going on. Maybe just learning that a lot of stores in your community are closed on a certain day of the week, or understanding the holiday system. Or maybe your location has special holidays or celebrations or town gatherings and events, and it's a great way for newcomers to be a part of that. And most importantly is friendship. Like I said, our staff are only able to do so much in this category. We can do the rest. It's better, it's more complete if it comes from a community member who can dedicate more time than a case manager who maybe is servicing 60 other families. But the thing that we cannot provide is friendship. So that's a really great way that you can step in. You can go next slide. Thank you, Grace. So these are some of the core services that we provide in the community that community support comes from. Already talked about housing and transport, helping enroll in public benefits, medical systems, helping get kids enrolled in school, and not just going and filling out the paperwork, but also making sure that they have the proper vaccines, the proper prerequisites. Maybe they have to show previous transcripts, and also making sure that they're prepared for their first day of school, maybe backpacks and supplies, getting them already, getting them enrolled in free or reduced lunch, or providing access to food in their community. Also helping with the DMV, getting an ID or a driver's license. Having a valid government issued ID can be life-changing for a newcomer. Just being able to present that for when applying for jobs, when applying for benefits, when applying for apartments. It is so needed. We don't realize how often we show our ID for things, or how often we input that information until you do not have it. Helping with a bank account setup and grocery store navigation. So these are just some of the services in the community, and the keynote there being in the community. These are things that vary community to community. Many of these things vary state by state. Some of them are national programs such as WIC and SNAP, but a lot of them are local, the local school system, the local bank system, the local grocery store. These are things that exist in your community that you know better than we do working at a national level. And with that, when you help with these core services, it can lead to some really big questions, because maybe you have never had to enroll in public benefits before. Maybe you have always had a car, and so public transportation in your city has not been something that you have ever had to navigate. Maybe you've not had to enroll kids in school, or if you did, you started them in kindergarten and they go right into first grade and up the ladder. So you haven't navigated what it's like to enroll a 16-year-old in a high school, and they've never attended that before. So with that, it leads to big questions. You can go to the next slide. So some of the big questions that can come up from this, when helping find newcomers housing, why is the city laid out like this? Why are low-income housing communities in this area versus this area? They're in this area, but they don't have access to many resources that they need. They don't have access to transportation, grocery stores. And why is it still so expensive? Even though it's low income, why is it still so expensive? Maybe you're riding the bus for the first time welcoming a newcomer. Why does the bus take so long? Why does the bus route take 2 hours to go 5 miles down the road? Why is the system like this? Benefits enrollment, if you've never had to do that before. Why does it take so long to receive benefits? Families are hungry. They need to eat now. They need health care. Why is it taking so long? Filling out those forms. Oh my goodness, so much complication. Why, what are these requirements? This isn't realistic. Why are there so many ID requirements? It's taking a long time to get an ID for someone who is new. Or maybe they have an ID. As a refugee, you're given certain paperwork and certain identification. Maybe that's not accepted for employment, for housing. The closest grocery store is really far away. Why? Why is this a food desert? Why is our city spread out like this? So these are just some of the questions that myself and my team have heard from community partners who start getting involved and start realizing that there are really big things going on in their local community that have some problem areas. Now, of course, we hope that these questions don't come up, and we've heard from many wonderful community partners, that, oh my gosh, I figured out the bus system. I've always been so afraid of it, and now I've done it with this family, and it went so well. Why don't I take the bus? Oh, we got this identification quicker than we thought. It's so fantastic. And those are great. And we love when systems work that well. But sometimes they don't, right? And we're all aware when things don't always go our way. And so when these big questions come up, this is your space for how you can become an advocate in your community. You can go to the next slide, Grace. So how do we fix this in our community? How do we not just welcome, but how do we become advocates? So the definition of advocacy is any action that speaks favor of, recommends, argues for a cause, supports or defends, or pleads on behalf of others. So newcomers who are coming to the US often do not have the space to be advocates for themselves. They are focusing on survival. Many of our newcomers are living paycheck to paycheck. They are working lower wage jobs. They are living in a new space with a language that they either don't speak or have very limited knowledge of in a new system. Their time is full. They don't have time to advocate to make the bus have a better route, right? They're just gonna suck it up and be on the bus routes. So this is a space that you as a community member, as a community sponsor, can step in and stand up for newcomers. You can go to the next, thanks. So here are some of the ways that when we first think about advocacy that might come to mind. The first is advocating through our government system, through going to city council, town hall meetings, voting for your local elected officials and for your nationally and state elected officials as well. That's also as important. But if we're talking about things that are happening in your community, the person who is able to make the most change is elected at the local level. Meeting with your local transportation department, finding out who is in charge of your low income housing. Most likely your city has a fair housing commissioner or a fair housing department under HUD. And so finding out who they are. Maybe that you're able to meet with them and help them out in some way, or at least help them learn where you're coming from. Continuing to advocate in that space. Maybe it's attending school board meetings, pushing for better school lunch policies for children who don't have access to that. Maybe it's talking with other people who are elected in your space. Every town runs a little bit different. Everyone has different things. Maybe it's advocating with your county. Maybe it's just advocating in your own community. If you're a sponsor who's through a church or through a larger organization that's helped backing it, maybe you can get the church to support in this space as well. Or maybe the church decides to help fix some of these things. Maybe the church has access to transportation and provides a free bus service from an apartment to a popular workplace. Maybe the church starts putting together backpacks for kids who are newly enrolled in school, or helps provide a free community meal every Wednesday night. Ways that you all can step in without having to go to knock on the door of the government, especially if that's not a space that you are comfortable with, or maybe you feel like there's not change and movement happening there. There are ways that you can tackle it on your own and become your own advocate. So separate from ways that you can approach advocacy from a government perspective, or from talking to elected or higher up officials, there are also ways that you can just support your community and be an advocate for your community that don't involve that at all. Grace, you can next slide. So here are just some examples. Every community is different. Option one, or first step, is shopping small. There's so many locally owned refugee businesses. It's very popular for refugees to come over and start their own business, or maybe a generation or two ago when they started that. Supporting those locally, making sure that money that you spend is flowing back into your community will help support and advocate for those spaces, especially small businesses that it's hard for them to maintain a livelihood. Supporting local events, finding out what local events are happening in communities that you support, figuring out ways you can support them, whether that be financially, through volunteering, or just showing up and telling people about it. You probably have a much wider voice than you realize. Through your connections, through your social media, through your circles of interest, there are so many ways that you can magnify things that are going on for people who don't have that space. Most likely your town has a local library, and local libraries have so many great resources, helping advocate for those and also helping newcomers get connected to those. My local library, I live in Denver, we have free LinkedIn Learning. They have free monthly financial planning classes. They have free programming for children. And that's just like the tip of the iceberg. And so tapping into some of those things and either supporting them or just advocating for them, letting people know that those exist. I wouldn't know about any of those things my library did if I didn't like going to the library, I didn't like reading. And if you don't have a lot of that in your community, there are great ways to talk about it. To local advocacy, this ties back to promoting things, encouraging others to also vote, to also show up to things, to also join you in whatever cause you feel inspired to do, and promoting that. Maybe that is through awareness, through social media, through public forums that you are a part of, through your workspace, through your church space. You will know what the appropriate steps are for you, and maybe think about them. Also, just important for you to be aware of organizations and nonprofits that you can either be giving to, be promoting, be supporting, be volunteering with, and also just maybe those are organizations that you can connect newcomers to if you're part of a sponsorship opportunity. Maybe you're really struggling to help make sure that people are fed, and there are tons of local food pantries or food donation drives or like free pantries that you just need to be aware of and partner with them. or clothing. There are so many different low or free cost clothing drives, clothing pantries. Where do you want to, when you clean out your closet as we head into the cooler months, hopefully right around the corner, right? Where are you going to donate that to? Is it somewhere that can be local, that you can support, something that you know will go back into your community? And that is something just that for each person, that awareness looks different. I'm sure that there are many different communities represented on this call, and it's up to you to kind of own that and look into that for yourself. And the last one is volunteering. If you're not volunteering with us, there's so many other wonderful places and ways to volunteer, not just with newcomers, but just with helping in many of these spaces, in ways that can just make your community better. How can your community grow? And how can you be a part of that? And that's up for every individual to figure out. And with that, with figuring out where you fit into that, Grace, you can get next slide. I wanted to share some spaces that you can educate yourself. Most of these recommendations are around the space of welcoming newcomers. Since that is what CWS does, I'd be remiss if I did not plug that. However, so many of these resources also just help promote being a more welcoming force and being a better advocate in your space. I can speak about each of these at great length because I have read all these books, and the next slide that I'll show has movies and some other sources that I'll get to in a moment. But just wanted to highlight a few. If you come from a faith background, the first two books, Beyond Welcome and Generous Justice, are really fantastic resources on how you get to be a welcoming force in your community and also provide assistance about overstepping or hurting. It is very easy for the community to hinder rather than help. It's a very fine line and a very delicate balance, and they're both really great resources. And then the last 4 or 5, starting with the New Odyssey and then working the way down. All of those are books from refugee or newcomer perspectives and talk about different experiences that they have either overseas or here in the US, which really helps provide a well-rounded understanding of what people go through in order to come to the US and be part of our community and our support. So highly recommend, take a photo of this, check it out at your local library, where you can also check out other resources that they have. Yeah, highly recommend. Maybe add one of these to your reading lists, continue to educate yourself. And if reading is just not your thing, also wanted to throw on a couple of movies and news sources. There's plenty of other movies and news sources as well, but these are just some of my top favorites. If you have not read, or I'm sorry, if you have not seen The Swimmers, which is on Netflix, which very popular streaming service, many of us have it. Maybe some of us got booted off of our parents' accounts recently, but if you can access a Netflix account, The Swimmers is a fantastic movie about the refugee crisis in the Middle East and in Greece, and it is a very heartfelt story about 2 girls who go on to swim for the Olympics. And so as we've seen some of the Olympic qualifiers and other exciting sports events going on, maybe that'll motivate you to look in that space. I also want to include a couple of news sources that provide a world-focused news reporting. We all get our news in different spaces, and it's for you to decide where you get your news and how you educate yourself. But if you are someone who does like to educate yourself through the news, circling back to focusing on your community, continuing to read your local news. If you have a local newspaper, if you have a local news station, continuing to listen and support them, as that will probably tell you stuff that's going on that maybe you haven't heard about in your own community or in your own state. But then some news sources that provide a world-focused reporting, not just the US. Many of our main news sources here in the US focus mostly on domestic issues, which isn't completely valid. They are talking to a US-based audience. So there's no fault in that. But if you're interested in things that are going on outside of the US, I highly encourage you to maybe add some BBC alerts or Africa Today. They're both really fantastic. There's so much going on in the world, and if you are interested in welcoming newcomers, educating yourself on when Niger in West Africa just fell through a military coup, which we'll see a humanitarian crisis come out of that. Tomorrow is the 2-year anniversary of the Taliban takeover of Afghanistan, and there's so much news coming out about how the past 2 years have impacted the people who live in that country. We have continued to see the war in Ukraine that is going on into a year and a half and has displaced millions into Eastern Europe. And staying up to date of what's going on there is very important. I also recommend a New Humanitarian. It is a weekly newsletter. I think it's just newhumanitarian.com or .org. And they, on Friday mornings, will send you the top news stories regarding displaced people and newcomers. And they'll kind of skim it all together. They collect it from as many unbiased and trustworthy news sources as exist. And they'll hit the big highlights of what's going on in the world of humanitarian aid. So if you like a quick skim, that's a great one to get in your inbox at the end of the week. So yeah, as we wrap up, I would love to open it up for questions. If you need Grace to go back and take so you can take photos of those books or movies, let us know. We can show those. I highly encourage you that if you are not involved in your community, that you consider just how it would work for you. Maybe your first step is just educating yourself, spending a few hours watching a movie or reading a book, and then deciding how you want to be involved. But if you are not involved with either welcoming newcomers or in other ways that you can be involved in your community, we'd love for you, if this space just makes you think about it just a little bit more. I hope that it does, and that you get to figure out how it works best for you. I recognize that everyone has their own amounts of time and energy and resources to give and to share. But I encourage you to walk away from this thinking about how you can be involved to make your community a more welcoming and a better place. So with that, I'll open it up to questions if anyone has any. And if you don't, I hope you have an absolutely fantastic rest of your Monday.
Thank you, Abby, so much. Yes, we're now going to answer the questions that you submitted. Just as a reminder, you can still submit any question that you have in the questions box. One of the questions here, Abby, is, are there government funds available for resettlement of humanitarian parolees like Haitians and those from other selected countries, as there are for refugees?
Yeah, that's a really fantastic question. And the space for welcoming Haitians, Cubans, Venezuelans, and Nicaraguans is more in the private sponsorship space. And there are various grants and certain things that you would have to apply for and be selected. And some of that research needs to occur because some of it's at like a state and local level as well. But if you are interested in being a sponsor, or that's a community that has your heart, you can email. Let me see if I can put this in the chat. Maybe not. Okay, someone will put in the chat, or we can send it out. But if you email sponsorship, the way you spell normal way you spell sponsorship, at cwsglobal.org, someone from our private sponsorship team will be able to get back to you and can provide you with a little bit more information in that space. So thank you.
Okay, Abby, and another question. What are some ways to empower refugees to advocate for themselves?
Yeah, that is a fantastic question. And yeah, that's the goal, right? Like the goal is that refugees will come, they will become a wonderful, well-rounded part of the community, and that they will continue to give back to that community. We're very thankful that that is what we see. Refugees will always pay more in taxes and support than they ever receive in government benefits, normally by about $30,000 over the course of their life, which is crazy. But if you are someone who supports refugees in some space, we really advocate that you teach and not show. that you work with someone and say, hey, the bus line, it is not getting you where you need to go, right? I'm going to file a complaint or, a feedback, right, to your local transportation commission. Would you like to as well? Can I show you how to do it? Can we walk through the form together? I'm going to attend a local town hall and talk about the housing. You actually live in the housing. Would you be comfortable coming with me and sharing your perspective? Recognizing that refugees often or just newcomers in general, often have a higher fear factor of advocating for themselves in the community, not wanting to cause a fuss and not wanting to be viewed as more of a hindrance than sometimes they already feel like they are. So having those conversations delicately and putting that power in the hands of the newcomer that you're talking to is definitely a great first step. So thank you for that. Great question.
Thank you, Abby. One more question. When co-sponsors are trying to advocate for the refugees and the school districts, but the school districts are not responsive, are there any additional resources for co-sponsors to use?
Yeah, no, that is a great question. And yes, every school system is different. So definitely a caveat there that the way that school systems are structured do vary across the country. Some counties have there's not just the school board that's in the local school system, but there's also a county board. So you could take it to the next step. Or maybe there's a state board, recognizing that not all communities are set up that way. Also recognizing that even if it's not a community board, maybe there is a PTA or there are other concerned parents or community members that can join you in advocating. More voices tend to get a quicker response. And so if you're able to push and have some other community members step in and continue to support you, then that can be a great step. Also going directly to the school's administration. If some schools have meet the principal, regular ongoing office hours or spaces that someone can directly talk to. Once again, not universal, but just looking into, separate from just the school board, where are avenues that your community has and promotes for ways to continue to push for important issues.
Thank you, Abby. And yeah, I love the points that you made when you talked about supporting them. One of the ways that I've seen also community sponsors supporting the refugees is even by catering from them. Many of the refugees have great taste in food, and so even supporting them in these small ways can go a long way. So that's really great. These are all the questions that we have for today. If there is no more questions, we will go ahead and finish our webinar for today. So I want to thank you again, Abby, for joining us today. I want to thank everyone on the webinar for joining RWC Lunch and Learn. We would like to hear from you and receive your feedback on today's webinar and hear your suggestions for future topics. So if you have your phone on you, if you can just scan this QR code, it's going to take you to our survey to leave your comments there. And also, as a reminder, again, I'm going to be sending the recording of today's webinar to everyone, and also following with that some resources and some links that Abby would be suggesting for everyone who is joining. And yeah, you will receive that in your email. And thank you so much for joining us today. Have a great rest of your week.